Some Good Tea Story Time, where we drink some tea and share a story. I am your host, Katie. On this Halloween night, I bring you a story from a deeply haunted house in Lancaster, England. While we walk its dusty halls and listen for whispers and slamming doors together, I am enjoying Curiouser and Curiouser by Wynwood Farms. Pour yourself a cup, pull up a chair, and let's settle in. Glimpses and Whispers. On Halloween, we decorate our houses, making them spooky and frightening to children and sometimes to adults. And then we go house to house, door to door, sharing in the revelry and enjoying seeing the creativity of the lights, the costumes, and the often extravagant lengths that some of our neighbors will go to haunt their houses for this spookiest of seasons. But for some places, for some houses, they need no extra trappings, no false cobwebs and purple lights, no plastic spiders and stand-up skeletons to become haunted. They don't wait for one night a year to creep and lurk in the dark, because for some houses, they are haunted all of the time. Houghton Tower is a beautiful fortified manor house high upon a hill in Lancaster, England. It was originally constructed for the de Houghton family in 1560 to about 1565, and has remained connected with them ever since. The manor house has played host to a tremendous amount of historical figures. Reportedly, William Shakespeare has connections to the location. King James I visited and spent several days in which he supposedly was so thoroughly impressed with the steak he was given at one of the banquets that he knighted it sirloin, though evidence for this claim is not forthcoming. There are, however, paintings of his visit to the Houghton Tower, the stag hunt he took there, and even a copy of the feast menu with the names of the kitchen workers, cooks, and serfs assisting for the 2 days that the massive banquet took place. In 1643, a civil war raged through the area, and not only was the house damaged, but 100 parliamentary forces lost their lives in an explosion that destroyed a central tower of the house. This tower was never rebuilt and is missing to this day. It is rumored that the tower was once used to hold accused witches prisoners during the witch trials in the area in the 1600s, for the servant passages below the manor house, when dimly lit, are damp and dark and dungeon-like indeed. If it is not true, it would have been an effective place to trap accused witches or criminals of any sort, awaiting hanging out on the great lawn of the manor house for all to see, regardless. As time passed, however, the tower and its embattlement fell into disrepair and became derelict. Charles Dickens paid Houghton Tower a visit in 1867, while it is still in disrepair at the time, and despite its condition, he was inspired and added it to his writings. The house has been renovated since, and repaired and expanded. The Houghton Tower, as it stands today, is an impressive, embossing edifice standing amongst the trees on the hill in Lancaster. Very castle-like in its construction, it is built of a cool brown to gray sandstone, and boasts an outer and inner courtyard which can be entered through massive west-facing gatehouses. The gatehouse is embattled very much like a castle, with a 2-story central tower rising above it to loom over all who enter. Along the archway, as guests pass through, they can see a cartouche of Samson and the lion carved and glowering down upon them. The whole of the inner courtyard is also embattled, showing guests just why this place was host to Civil War troops, and why it played a role in holding prisoners as well. With so many stones between you and freedom, if the gates were to close, how could you hope to escape? In the northeast corner of the courtyard, there is now a well house where once stood the tower where all the men were killed during the Civil War. The great hall and the kitchens are to the north, the staterooms to the east, and the living rooms are to the south and west, with most of the height in the 2 stories aside from the gatehouse tower itself. In the northeast corner, there once was a chapel with its own bell that could be heard in the nearby town. Now there stands a lovely porch. The interior of the rooms are mainly in the Tudor style, and the ballroom boasts 4,000 stained glass panes. The grounds of Hooton Tower are no less castle-like, with a large lawn before it and walled gardens, also known as the Wilderness, all about it. It has boasted gardens and smaller walled mazes as well, with a walled barn built of sandstone and a cart house. To the east are the stables and the carriage house that once housed the manor's horses and carriages. Today, you and I could visit the tower and its grounds. It is listed and maintained as an important historical location. It is open to the public for a nominal fee at times of the year for tours, events, and can be booked for weddings. It plays host to civil activities now like plays, reenactments, tea time, and a large collection of doll houses. It has been featured as a sweeping romantic backdrop for many TV shows and films, helping to set a tone for these pieces. What the tour pamphlets cannot capture, however, what the films cannot convey, is that sense that people have reported walking those halls and stepping onto those grounds. That feeling of agelessness, of being watched, followed, sometimes welcoming, but oftentimes not. That feeling of being haunted. A place like Hooton Tower can only see so much history, only endure so much violence and bloodshed, but before it becomes too full and the cup starts to spill over into our world. History is difficult, for it doesn't give us all the details of where all of these wandering souls could have come from. Oftentimes, we are left only to guess at who they were and why they cling to places like Hooton Tower still. Is it because of some tragedy? Is it a warning? Are they lonely, looking for someone or something? Are they angry or hurt, just trying to connect? We can never really know. Because, just like their ghosts, we are only left with glimpses and whispers of what used to be whole humans, whole lives, whole people, and that might be the greatest tragedy of all. One of many apparitions wandering the manor is the black dog. Such spirits are not an uncommon occurrence. We already know they are often seen as ill omens of fate or perhaps even death, and that seeing a dog more than once often spells doom for the viewer. The black dog of Hooton Tower, interestingly, appears in and around the well house. As you will note, the well house was built over the site of the central tower where, in 1643, nearly 100 men were killed in an explosion that destroyed and leveled the tower over top of them. Now, that particular building looks very different. The well house is rather small compared to the central tower, and the well inside, instead of reaching towards the sky, plunges over 120 feet deep down into the earth, where it finds the water that supplies the manor house. We have no record of the dog appearing before the construction of the well house, when the tower existed, or when it was in shambles before the well house stood. But since it had been built, it has been spoken by those living at the house, as well as those working and volunteering, and those visiting, that there is a dog that haunts the well house. It is said that the black dog appears late in the evening in and around the well house, flitting in and out of shadows. It makes no noise as it moves, and it is neither aggressive nor friendly, but always present and almost mournful in its appearance, if you can see it. Given the mass death that occurred so violently and abruptly at that place where all that house and well now stands, is it any wonder that the ground that absorbs so much blood that's now manifesting such a ghastly warning? But whether the dog is appearing to warn viewers away as a remembrance of fallen soldiers, or as an ominous sign of a witness of a faithful future, no one can tell. Another spirit, which lurks in the halls, takes a much less passive approach towards its role than the black dog. While the echoes of disembodied footsteps, moving faces in paintings, and fleeting, foreboding shadows will follow you if you dare to walk the halls of Hooton Tower. When you cross into the servants' quarters, you will find cold spots, whispers, and distant laughter. Angry Peter, if he manifests, is not to be mistaken for any of the other ghosts. Given his name due to his cantankerous mood swings, this poltergeist can become violent towards those who do not please him. His exact identity is lost to time, but this spirit is predisposed to throw objects, shout, and leave bruises or scratches on those that it seems to take a disliking to. Some have tried to test these manifestations and connect them to a monk figure that will appear and march towards the now non-existent chapel and ring the haunting bell that can be heard at times echoing outside the grounds. Hooton Tower has not had a church bell since the church was converted to a porch in a renovation quite some time ago. While some feel the monk is a separate manifestation altogether, an angry Peter is a spirit unto itself. When entering the courtyard for the first time late at night, guests are advised to respectfully greet Peter to appease the spirit and avoid taking pictures or attempting to record any of its manifestations. Otherwise, the hauntings will start with the echoing bell rings and culminate as objects are smashed, thrown, and guests are pinched and assailed and shouted off the premises. A more peaceful spirit is dubbed the Green Lady, a woman dressed in billowing green velvet that vanishes around corridors, opening doors that are locked and occasionally humming or laughing at passers-by. Another woman can also be seen when looking through the ballroom's stained glass windows. She is called the Truder Woman and is known to cross and pace back and forth in the center courtyard. No one quite remembers who she is, though there are theories, of course. Sightings are often brief and fleeting. Some guests have even mistaken her for a volunteer in period clothing. Parts of the manor house are still maintained in the Tudor style to this day, so perhaps this keeps this wayward soul tied to this location, still working, still walking about her home. We may never know. Inside, as long as you have greeted Peter, you may be able to hear the gentle laughter and catch the footprints of children in the carpet. In several of the cordoned-off rooms, historic furnishings and items can be viewed, but guests are not allowed to enter. So it's curious to note the little bare-footed prints of a child will occasionally appear in some of these rooms. Not always at night, and sometimes you can catch the sound of running feet and laughing voices echoing in the castle halls when you are all alone. Some have spotted the young child in her billowing white dress as she plays or sits or just stands and stares. Those who are experienced know better than to follow if she beckons to them, or to try and track down where those little footprints lead. Her laughs may seem innocent enough, but her face is eyeless, and her smile too wide to fully be human anymore. Deep below the manor house are the servants' passages, quarters, and cellars. They were renovated and used for many purposes throughout the years, as was the entirety of the manor. In 1612, local legend reports that the passages and rooms below Hooton Tower were used to hold those accused of witchcraft during the Lancaster witch trials. Known as the Pendle witch trials, they took place in August of 1612 and are considered some of the most well-known and significant in English history. 12 people were accused of witchcraft and murdering 10 victims. 11 of those people accused went to trial, and 10 of those were found guilty and hung for murder and witchcraft. The trials were well documented, and it is vital for us to understand that the evidence used against the accused was based on gossip, superstition, and confessions extracted under threat and torture. The accused were barred from calling witnesses of their own, defense, or counsel of any kind. The tie to Hooton Tower comes from Sir Richard Hooton, acting as an assistant to the judge at the time, and it is speculated, due to the proximity of the accused and the crimes to the tower, that it would have been considered a good location to hold and interrogate the prisoners. Though it is recorded that the trial for most took place in Lancaster Castle itself rather than Hooton Tower. The passages below Hooton Tower would have made the perfect holding cells for any supposed criminal. They are dark and damp, with no natural light source, and are easy to guard with the battlements above and many doors and wrought iron gates that lock between those held and freedom above. If taken below, there truly would be no hope of freedom without divine intervention. The only way out was through the noose, and history tells us that was the unfortunate fate for all too many accused of witchcraft at the time. Gallows Hill, now Wilsonson's Park, was the site where 9 of the accused met their fate. Easily visible to the town below and surrounding it, it would have been the best choice to hold a large gathering to make an example of these clearly evil, murderous, devil-worshipping witches. The long hours of confinement, trial, torture, and forced confession that comes with witch trials would have left the souls of those held in the dungeons of the tower broken. Would it be any wonder that those halls and rooms may still echo with their torments? If not those souls, then who haunts them to this day? If you walk them tonight, and you hear soft crying, the sounds of chains, and the closing of a door behind you, isn't that to be expected? When you stand and look into a cellar room, perhaps a prison cell just as much as cold storage, and feel a deep sense of despair and feel an overwhelming urge to get out, doesn't that just make sense? For 12 people over 400 years ago, that's what they heard, that's what they felt. But they were trapped, held, forced to stay, and forced to pay for crimes they never even imagined committing. If you can see their claw marks on the wooden doors and hear their sad, shuffling steps pacing the rooms while you pass by, just be grateful it's not your fingers bleeding in the cold and the dark as you waste away and wait for the inevitable end. Reduced to whispers and glimpses now in the flickering light of the fluorescent bulbs of our modern world. Thank you for listening to Some Good Tea, Storytime. This story was researched and written by yours truly. The music was composed with resources purchased from Monument Studios. I highly recommend them. As always, the tea on this episode is not a sponsor. We are just a fan. More about them can be found in the episode's description. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I invite you to share us with your friends and family. We grow because of wonderful listeners like you. This is all we have time for tonight, but we will talk at you later.